An 87-year-old woman has been murdered in her own home.
We've never investigated a crime as sad and horrendous as this.
A killer is on the loose, and an entire estate is caught up in suspicion.
His DNA profile has been found and his fingerprints have been found, but he's not on the database.
The police started to think they're not going to be able to solve this.
Forensics will have to go to unprecedented lengths to catch the killer at the crime scene.
Every murder scene's different, but the goal remains the same, to catch the killer.
On the outskirts of Mansfield in Nottinghamshire, a body has been discovered in a bungalow.
An elderly lady had been found in a home, severely beaten. Bloodstains on the base of the bed and also on the pillow of the bed. To come across that was just unimaginable, a horrendous crime scene.
Police waste no time and cordon off the bungalow and surrounding vicinity as a crime scene.
So at the start of a major crime investigation, there's what's called the golden hour, which is the first couple of hours of an investigation where all hands are on deck.
Sarah Thurkle has over 25 years' experience in crime scene investigation and is one of the UK's leading forensic trainers.
When you first enter a scene, it's very easy for someone to assume that go straight to the dead body. But it's quite good to take a step back and actually look at the scene and try and determine what might or might not have happened. Her walk-in frame was on its side and the lounge was in an untidy state, and there was some blood found close to the fireplace in the lounge.
CSIs follow the trail of disturbance to ascertain what happened at the bungalow.
Initially, it looked like the first attack and probably the most severe attack occurred in the lounge due to the blood and the hair around the fireplace. We believe she was thrown to the floor, punched, kicked, her face stamped on repeatedly. The bones in her neck were fractured. She'd been subjected to a vicious, violent, prolonged attack. She was then dragged through into the bedroom and then sexually assaulted in the bedroom.
The woman is identified as 87-year-old pensioner Gladys Godfrey.
Wreaths left by shocked neighbours of murder victim Gladys Godfrey. She was found in her bungalow with serious facial injuries after a wanton sexual attack.
Gladys was 87, 5 foot tall, 6 stone, lived alone, was very, very frail. She couldn't walk without the aid of a walking frame. She was well known in the area. She was a lovely old lady.
Neighbours say Gladys Godfrey liked nothing better than to stand in her doorway and give a friendly wave to people as they went by. They just can't believe she's become a murder victim.
To attack and kill an 87-year-old lady in her own home is an extreme rarity. We've never investigated such a crime before, and I don't think Nottinghamshire in their history have come across a case as sad and horrendous as this.
Working on a murder investigation can be quite upsetting. Some of the scenes that we do attend are quite horrific incidents. Gladys Godfrey was found on the bed, laying on her back with severe head injuries, and it looked like she'd been sexually assaulted. From a crime scene investigator's point of view, there's a priority to get potentially some DNA from the victim. An emotive and horrific attack like this really does motivate CSIs to be able to find the evidence to be able to solve the crime.
A pathologist takes samples from the victim. Detectives hope this will provide a DNA profile of a prime suspect within 48 hours.
Waiting for the result of any crime scene examination and trying to get a fingerprint or DNA would be of key importance. To get a result back is what we pray and hope for.
These examinations that we do don't take 10 minutes or 2 hours. We can be in a murder scene for several days or several weeks.
Amongst the disarray in Gladys's lounge is a blood marking that stands out.
There were some footprints found in blood on the lounge floor. Footprint evidence is good supporting evidence because they've either been laid at the time of the attack or very soon after. In a scene like this, we would take a series of photographs with a scale to show any detail on the footprint. And then we would recover the footprint by cutting the carpet out.
The shoe print is sent off to the lab for further analysis, while the CSIs process the outside scene.
As a crime scene investigator, you have to almost think as an offender would as to how would I approach this house? How would I climb in through the window? Or where would I knock on the door? Has the offender looked through the front window to see if the elderly lady's in the house? Sometimes you'll get peering in marks where you'll have the nose and the forehead and this part of the handprint. You might be able to get DNA from the sweat that's left on the window.
To assist them in building a profile of the killer, detectives investigate how the offender got into the bungalow.
At this crime scene, there were no signs of forced entry. The windows were intact. The door hadn't been forced. Possibly the door was left insecure, or that a key was involved. So was it someone that knew Gladys, or was it a total stranger attack?
Research has looked into what kind of offender we might be looking for. So the offender is more likely to be a known acquaintance to the victim. They are more likely to have been victimised themselves, and they are more likely to have an offending history.
CSIs look for trace evidence for anybody who's been within Gladys's home.
Everyone's fingerprints are unique. So if your fingerprints are found at a scene and you have fingerprints of somebody on record, you're able to definitively prove that that person has left their fingerprints in that scene. I would ensure that every single item in that lounge would be considered for fingerprint evidence. The door frames, any window frames. And again, in the bedroom, was there anything that looks like it's been moved? Where's her handbag? Where's her purse? Are they suitable surfaces to be fingerprinted? Are these fingerprints in Gladys's house from an innocent person, from a neighbour or a family friend, or are they from the offender? If there's any suggestion that there may be innocent people that have been in her house, we would request that we take elimination fingerprints from these people and also potentially elimination DNA.
CSIs continue to harvest evidence from the crime scene, whilst police gather elimination fingerprints from those who were known to visit Gladys's home.
We had many lines of enquiry that would take place in tandem. Victimology, getting to know Gladys, the local criminal intelligence, that will be key to the investigation, and one of the other key areas is the house-to-house enquiries in the area to see what people have seen or heard.
Are there any other incidents that's happened at this house that have been reported to the police? Has her house been burgled? Has she had strange people calling? Has her neighbour seen anybody in the area that seems unusual? Was there anything that might indicate that she thought something was going to happen?
Detectives look at recent crime reports for the local area and reveal a lead that could help track down the killer.
Crimes of this nature are a rarity, but very quickly we established that there'd been a previous offence at Gladys's home address almost 18 months ago.
"87-year-old Gladys Godfrey has been found murdered in her own home."
Whoever's done this is obviously an evil person. All police officers and CSIs working on the case would do everything in their powers to be able to bring justice for Gladys.
CSIs have recovered fingerprints and a bloody footprint from the crime scene. Swabs have been taken from the victim as the evidence suggests that she has been sexually assaulted. Detectives have now discovered that just 18 months ago, Gladys was the victim of another violent crime. If both the attacks are linked, this could provide critical evidence to help catch the killer.
At about 3 o'clock in the morning, Gladys answered a knock at the door and an offender entered the bungalow, knocked Gladys to the floor, tried to sexually assault Gladys. Despite her being frail and infirm, she managed to fight this man off. She managed to scratch him and pull a gold-hooped earring from the offender.
Police want anyone who recognises the attacker's earring to now contact them urgently.
Paul Bacon, a local solicitor, was the former president of the Nottingham Law Society.
What was clear that the attack was sexually motivated. He'd exposed himself and said to her, "You're going to get some of this." What was odd was that he then snatched her handbag and ran away with it. It was quite remarkable. She's quite frail, and for her to be able to react and bravely fight off someone to the extent that they left, and at the same time gathered this evidence, most importantly at all, she was alive to tell the tale.
Police were called to Gladys's bungalow to investigate the crime scene and take her victim statement.
Gladys was able to describe her attacker as a young man, dark hair, white and of slim build.
It was obviously difficult for her to give a very detailed description, but it did obviously help the police to have an idea as to the type of person, the size of the person. It was a male person.
Police took nail scrapings from Gladys and recovered the offender's earring. Both were sent to the lab for DNA analysis.
Both the exhibits were examined for DNA. They didn't appear to get a good profile from the earring. Nail scrapings are a really good source of DNA. If you grab somebody or scratch somebody, you can get foreign DNA right under the depth of your nail. Police medical examiner will cut the fingernails and do scrapings underneath in an attempt to try and find a mixed profile. Obviously, you're going to get the victim's DNA on there, but that can be easily eliminated. You're looking for any other foreign DNA.
Scientists were able to raise a partial DNA profile, which they processed through the National DNA Database. But there were no matches.
It's almost like a bittersweet blow, really, because you've got a partial DNA profile and you still don't know who the offender is.
Over the next few days, Gladys's handbag and its contents were returned to her by her neighbours across the estate.
The recovery of that property says to me what a caring nature the people of Ladybrook Mansfield have. I mean, these were things that could have been just chucked in the bin, but her handbag, her library card, her purse, family photos were bit by bit all returned to her, which of course gave the police a terrific advantage.
Detectives plot the locations of where the stolen items were found to determine the direction in which the attacker fled.
They'd obviously come on foot. The contents had been strewn in a particular direction. The police were able to draw the conclusion that this was a local person. This is not someone that's come from out the area. This is clearly someone that lives nearby or fairly close to the victim.
But despite the partial DNA profile and the thorough investigation, police were unable to identify an offender. Detectives investigating the murder are concerned that the same violent predator has struck again. The results from the intimate swabs are back and have produced a full DNA profile. Once again, there is no match on the National DNA Database. So the two DNA profiles from the separate attacks are compared.
What the scientists were able to establish was that the full DNA profile matched the partial profile from the fingernail scrapings that were taken from Gladys on the previous attack 18 months ago, so that we knew the offender had come back to attack Gladys and sadly murder Gladys on this occasion.
This was a breakthrough moment for the investigation. It's amazing that they're able to link two scenes from a year apart. But although both DNA profiles matched, it still poses a really difficult question for the SIO as to who is my offender.
When we look at sexually violent offenders, we often find that they have often been victims of violence themselves in their childhood, in their backgrounds. We may also be looking for an offender who experiences mental health difficulties. We may be looking for somebody who has an emotional disengagement to such a sexually violent assault. It's possible that there is a negative emotionality after the victim fought back in the first attack, perhaps making the second attack more severe and more violent.
It was extremely worrying because we knew that this man had attacked twice. Yes, he'd attacked the same victim, but he'd gone on to kill. The local community were in fear that this man might attack again.
This was a really brutal attack in a quiet residential area. I mean, Ladybrook Estate is a close community. Everybody knows everybody, mainly occupied by elderly people. So it came as a massive shock to everyone.
She was a lovely little old lady. She loved to talk to people and children.
Everybody on the street knew it, and it's a very sad loss that this has happened to a woman of 87 years of age.
Gladys Godfrey was very smart, very friendly, well-known, well-liked. She enjoyed standing on her doorstep and saying hello to people. What happened here, it was awful. So unexpected. Really, really tragic for everybody.
Detectives talked to local residents to ascertain whether they saw anything unusual across the estate.
We found a witness who'd seen someone riding away from the area of the crime scene on the morning that Gladys was discovered. It was someone that was seen on a bike. It might have been the offender, it might have been someone on the way to work, but it was someone that we wanted to eliminate.
The digital forensic team analysed the local CCTV footage.
It was a lot of work, but to try and trace this individual was of key importance. We put an appeal out through the media, but we couldn't find this individual or cite this individual on any CCTV footage that we had.
As the pressure mounts from the local community, scientists study the shoe print recovered from the crime scene.
The purpose of seizing a footwear mark from a scene is to be able to identify the size, the make of shoe, and also any unique damage on the sole of that shoe. So if we were able to arrest an offender, we would be able to match up any footwear that they had with the footprints that were found at the crime scene.
The crime scene manager at the time had identified a shoe that he thought may be responsible for leaving the footmark, which was called a Euroland shoe. And it was a tremendous piece of forensic investigation.
Police are confident they know the footwear worn by Gladys's killer and have his DNA profile linked to the previous attack and the murder.
There is a perception that DNA is the crux of the evidence. If you find a DNA profile, you've got the offender. That is only relevant if the offender's been arrested and had their DNA taken. There's a lot of other evidence forensically that can link an offender to a scene, for example, fingerprints.
Police have been collating elimination fingerprints from those who are known to visit Gladys. These are compared against the fingerprints recovered from the crime scene to see whether anyone unknown to Gladys has been in her home.
The elimination fingerprints are taken normally on a form using black ink. You'd roll the finger across the paper so that you've got all possible angles and sections of the fingerprint. Because when you have a chance fingerprint at a scene, you won't just get one solid fingerprint. These would be checked manually by a fingerprint expert. Any scenes of crime marks from the crime scene that match elimination fingerprints are then discarded.
Once the elimination fingerprints have been deducted from the fingerprints found at the crime scene, there are still a number of prints unaccounted for. The detectives hope that these could provide a lead.
It's quite a breakthrough to have 14 or 15 fingerprints that haven't been eliminated, some of which may or may not have been from an offender.
Despite having a full DNA profile, fingerprints, a shoe print, and a description of the offender, the police still have no suspects. With no other techniques to turn to, Nottinghamshire Police decide to undertake an unprecedented mass screening operation. it will be one of the largest targeted elimination procedures in the force's history.
It was a significant piece of our investigation. We believed that this may be a local offender. All of those individuals were looked at and then prioritised in terms of an elimination process. We drew up intelligence-led parameters to DNA swab local men in the area.
A mass screen is a voluntary thing where they would look at a demographic according to the old lady's statement, same age group, the same ethnic origin.
We had two key elements to eliminate suspects or persons of interest with, namely a full DNA profile and unidentified fingerprint impressions obtained from the crime scene.
It's a huge operation, all weathers, using local community centres, knocking on doors, asking people to give their samples. A massive operation. It was interesting that there was no reluctance on the men from Ladybrook to do that. Whoever the perpetrator was, people of Ladybrook were determined to make sure he was found.
Hundreds of samples were sent off to be compared against the DNA found at the crime scene. Police were hoping that one of them would match back to the offender.
We were motivated to carry on, track this man down, because the nature of the attack on Gladys was enough motivation. Every day that we came to work, we were determined this might be the day that we find this man.
12 months into the investigation, and over 1,000 men in the targeted area had been eliminated from police inquiries. But there were no matches, and hundreds of locals were still yet to be processed.
It was frustrating, but we knew if the DNA didn't match and the fingerprints didn't match, those individuals weren't the offender. It was as simple as that. By eliminating those people, we were working towards the end, and amongst those people yet to be seen, the offender still may lay.
As time went on and there was no real valuable response, the police started to think, I'm sure, that they're not going to be able to solve this. And then something really remarkable happened.
A year has passed since the murder of pensioner Gladys Godfrey. Police have the DNA and description of the offender, plus his fingerprints and a footprint, but they still do not have a suspect. Detectives believe that the killer lives locally and have conducted a mass screen, eliminating DNA samples from over 1,000 local men. But whoever murdered Gladys is still at large.
The DNA database started in 1995. This offence was back in 2002, so it was really only 7 years since the start of the DNA database. There weren't as many profiles, obviously, as there are now. So it's back to old-fashioned detective work. It's obvious that there's somebody really bad out there that needs arresting and needs catching.
With no arrests made, tensions are rising amongst the community, who fear that the killer may strike again.
Detectives investigating the murder of a Mansfield pensioner have followed up on 8,000 leads, but have yet to arrest anyone. More than 2,000 burglar alarms have been fitted by the council on the estate to reassure residents.
Mansfield is a nice town, but it's a tough town. You think about the fact that the mining community earned good money. There were the have-nots and the haves, which were the miners, and it did involve fights and trouble and burglaries and so on. Where Gladys lived was the little community in of itself. The community were particularly concerned because she'd been attacked 18 months earlier, and I think it made older residents in that area particularly anxious.
It's possible that when offenders aren't detected, it gives them the impetus to continue carrying out crime and perhaps increasing the severity of the crime. In sexual homicide cases, it's not uncommon to hear the offender report that they had an impulse or a serious compulsion, so it's possible for that reason that that compulsion would have persisted.
It was extremely worrying because we knew whilst this person was free and at large, he may attack again. So it really gave us some impetus, if any was needed, to try and catch this man.
Away from the public eye, the Forensic Intelligence Bureau, known as the FIB, has been developing a revolutionary technique which may help catch the killer.
One of the forensic scientists made me aware of the new investigative technique of familial DNA. It searches for possible relatives, possible parents, possible children, possible siblings of the offender.
DNA shares many similarities amongst relatives. Therefore, if an offender is related to someone on the National DNA Database, scientists can hone in on possible profile matches.
Familial searching relies on the fact that you can get a DNA profile from the scene of a crime and look for people who potentially might be relatives on the database, a database of people who have committed crimes in the past.
This was a new procedure in 2002. So, for example, if you've got an offender who's 21, 22 years old and a male, never been arrested, but their dad or brother has been arrested, their DNA profile will be on the DNA database.
For this technique to lead to a prime suspect, the investigation has to lean on the likelihood that there is a history of offending within a family unit.
There's a huge body of research looking into whether we are more likely to commit an act of crime if our family members have done so. In that regard, the familial database is a helpful tool.
Nottinghamshire Police nominated themselves to be one of the first forces to trial this new technique.
Everyone was extremely determined to bring this case to a successful conclusion, and this familial DNA technique was another avenue that we all wanted to pursue.
They'd been working on this case for a year or so and were at a dead end, and the emotion was high in the room because it was a very serious case and a very vulnerable victim, and it needed to be solved. Nobody knew whether or not this was going to work, so we were a little apprehensive and the police maybe a little doubtful because they'd never come across anything like this. But they asked us if familial searching would be appropriate, and we agreed that we would take the samples from the scene and carry out that process.
The FIB runs the DNA profile found at the crime scene through the pioneering familial DNA search engine. This relists the samples on the National DNA Database in order of similarity to the suspect's DNA.
Familial DNA is the same as an eyewitness. It narrows down a list of people for the police to talk to. So we were going to give them lists of people which they then had to work through to work out who might be the best potential leads for interviewing.
You can be faced with a huge list of names that are completely irrelevant, which is where then you have to narrow down your search criteria. Geographical region, the demographic you're looking at, the age group, the ethnic origin.
Now, there were hundreds and hundreds of people in that list, but were determined that we would track this man down because this was a truly horrendous crime that everyone wanted to solve. One of the first things that we looked at was the local people that were on these familial lists. Gladys had described the offender as being white. We prioritised that, and then members of the team would visit those individuals, visit their family members, draw up a family tree.
Detectives quickly identified two families to prioritise.
And the male members of those families were DNA buccal swabbed and their elimination fingerprints taken as well. And that's a purely voluntary process.
The swabs and fingerprints taken from the men within these families are sent off to the lab to be compared against the samples found at the crime scene. Within 24 hours, Kevin Flint received the call that he'd been waiting for. They had a positive match to the DNA sample recovered from Gladys's intimate swabs and to the partial profile found under her fingernails from the first attack. The same man's fingerprints also matched 12 of the fingerprints found at the crime scene. The police had finally identified the killer.
For 15 months, we worked extremely hard and thought every day we would find this person, and to actually know that we'd got a positive ID on the fingerprints and on the DNA was just undescribable. Just a euphoric experience.
When we got the phone call from Nottinghamshire Police to say that they'd identified the suspect, you're happy that you've contributed to a successful outcome in a case. You remember the scene photos of the case. You remember that it was a murder. It's difficult to feel happy. It's the job. Satisfaction would be a better word than happy.
We were obviously fearful of a repercussion of the crime that he'd committed, so we didn't take long in drawing up an arrest plan and arrested him as soon as possible.
Police waste no time and arrest their prime suspect, 22-year-old Jason Ward.
He was arrested at his workplace by police officers, who then took him into custody and interviewed him. And that all has been done within a fairly short period of time, 24 hours. But once that time limit is reached, the police have to charge or release the person.
In the presence of his solicitor, he spoke freely on interview, denied the offence, denied entering Gladys's home. He was a young man who worked at a local factory as a machine operator.
He was only 22. I think he was much younger than everybody had expected. But in terms of the description, he did match what Gladys had told the police in her first statement.
Jason is described as a loner. He doesn't socialise very much with others. He spends a lot of time playing video games. There is some evidence to indicate that those who are more isolated in society are more likely to commit very serious crimes.
Detectives look at Jason Ward's previous addresses, which provides them with further circumstantial evidence.
We knew that he lived 1.5 miles from the crime scene. He used to live 1/4 mile from where Gladys lived.
Jason Ward lived close to Gladys at the time of her murder, but by the time of the mass DNA screening, he had moved just outside of their priority perimeter. His DNA and fingerprints were found at the crime scene, but in order to secure a conviction, the forensics searched his home for more incriminating evidence.
As a crime scene manager, there are several different potential crime scenes that you'd be called to. Obviously, the scene where the body is. We would be involved in the arrest of the suspect being dealt with in custody, any clothing or shoes taken from him. I would ensure that a CSI would be assigned to go into the suspect's address to search for any items that might link back to the offence and the attack on Gladys Godfrey. In this case, because there was quite a long gap between the offence happening and the offender being arrested, potentially a lot of the evidence, any clothing or shoes or anything taken from the crime scene by the offender, any trophies or anything like that, might well not be in the suspect's property.
On searching Jason's home address, we recovered a Euroland shoe.
The shoe is immediately sent to the lab to be compared against the bloody shoe print found at the crime scene.
Every action that we take is ultimately trying to prove or disprove an offender or offenders have been at that scene. So if we were able to match up any possible offenders' footwear that they had with the footprints that were found at the crime scene. So it could be excellent evidence to be able to link that shoe to the crime scene.
Despite the amount of forensic evidence, Jason Ward is denying he's ever been in Gladys's home. The scientists worked tirelessly against the clock to strengthen the case against him and prioritise tests on the Euroland shoe.
If the crime scene footprint is good enough, it may be possible to match this against a suspect's shoe. Firstly, you're looking for the unique damage on the sole of the shoe. We would be able to compare against the marks that have been found at the crime scene.
The foot pattern was analysed and it actually did match the footmark that had been recovered in blood.
This is a breakthrough moment for the investigation team. But through further examination of the shoe, they hope to uncover even more compelling evidence to link Jason Ward back to the crime scene. Nottinghamshire police turned to a pioneering forensic technique called familial DNA searching, which led to the arrest of 22-year-old Jason Ward for the murder of 87-year-old Gladys Godfrey. DNA and fingerprint evidence has linked Ward to the murder, but police still need more evidence to secure a conviction. A shoe recovered from Ward's home has matched the bloody footprint from the crime scene, and upon further analysis, forensics believe they have found more compelling evidence.
When you're trying to connect a perpetrator to a crime scene, it's obviously very helpful if the perpetrator leaves something at the crime scene. But it's even more helpful if they take something away from the crime scene. So for instance, if the offender leaves semen at the crime scene, but later on blood from the victim is detected on the offender, that's far more powerful evidence than just the one way.
Any potential blood, we would take a tiny little swab. We would use a test called KM or Castle-Meyer. This is a colour-changing test where we apply chemicals to this piece of filter paper that we've swabbed the blood with, and it changes colour. If it changes to a purple colour, it means that it's a positive for blood. If it's positive, then they would further swab it and submit that swab for DNA profiling to the lab.
The blood sample provided a full DNA profile, which is then compared to Gladys Godfrey's DNA.
It matched, so we were able to ascertain that that is actually from Gladys Godfrey, which again ties into the crime scene.
With only hours left on Jason Ward's custody limit, police put this breakthrough evidence to him.
Subsequently admitted that it was him that had entered Gladys's home. He admitted the sexual assault. It was clear to us that the person that was responsible for the sexual assault had actually murdered Gladys as well.
With the mountain of forensic evidence recovered from 3 key scenes, police now had enough to charge Jason Ward with the murder and sexual assault of Gladys Godfrey.
Upon being charged, he admitted the full offence. When confronted with the amount of evidence that we gathered in this case, he didn't have anywhere to go, quite frankly. It was an emotional time for the investigation team. You were always wary during that 15 months until we arrested this man that he was out there and he might strike again.
Paul Bacon was brought in as a defence solicitor to represent Jason Ward.
We obviously represent the client as best we can. If they're pleading not guilty, we fight the case as hard as we can. But if they tell us, or it becomes clear there's evidence which is overwhelming, we advise them that their plea has to be guilty. Then our role then is to try and mitigate the penalties for them. You have to look for the reasons for someone to do what they've done, particularly so in this case. And we did arrange for psychological and psychiatric reports to be prepared. We're looking obviously for possibly a defence, diminished responsibility, that sort of thing.
It is relatively common for the defence to argue a line of diminished responsibility based on mental health capabilities. A great body of literature indicates that those who commit very serious violent offences, such as murder, are more likely to be experiencing psychopathic traits, a disregard for others and the feelings of others, a lack of empathy. This is a reflection of their brain functioning.
Jason Ward was put forward for a psychiatric assessment. in an attempt to ascertain the reason behind his actions.
There's little research that explores elderly sexual abuse. There's some evidence to indicate that offenders are motivated by opportunity for sex, anger, and the idea or the belief that an elderly victim does not pose a threat in return. It's possible that Jason would have seen Gladys as an ideal victim through which to achieve those means for sexual gratification and with little threat in return. We refer to this kind of decision-making process as a cost-benefit analysis. So by attending the scene with the first attack, he would have had the opportunity to look at entry points, layout inside the building, assess the level of vulnerability of the person that lives there. It shows some element of planning, that they didn't just stumble across this address, that they had left their home with the intention to visit this location and this victim specifically.
Jason Ward was described as a loner who abused solvents.
Research indicates that solvent abuse of this kind can lead to temporary and longer-term impacts on brain functioning, including facets such as impulsiveness, sensation-seeking, emotional disengagement, and numbness to certain acts. Sustained and regular long-term use of solvents may have impacts that may have influenced the commission of this act of crime.
Whether he had abused the aerosol, he'd gone out, he may have seen Gladys at the doorstep and then viewed Gladys as a target, is our suspicion.
I felt he was perplexed, confused, really difficult to understand his motivation, and I think he found it difficult to understand his motivation too.
At the first court hearing, Jason Ward pleads guilty to the murder, rape, and indecent assault of Gladys Godfrey and the burglary of her home.
The judge here at Nottingham Crown Court described this as a truly horrendous crime.
At court, the judge took the defence's psychiatric reports into consideration. He handed Jason Ward a life sentence with a minimum term of 22 years.
This was the first time this process of familial searching was used to solve a murder anywhere in the world.
At the time we did this, I don't think any of us realised it would be a landmark case.
It's good to have played one's part. You know, other people have taken it on and the techniques are much more advanced now.
To be involved in its inception, development and use is very, very gratifying. It's a fantastic thing that detected many, many serious crimes around the world.
Every loss of human life is a tragedy, but if it's a death of an elderly victim or a child, there is something inside you that drives you. No one should fear living in their own home.
What's remarkable about this is this new technique of using familial DNA started here in Mansfield. And if you think about it, if Gladys hadn't scratched his face, pulled a gold earring from his ear, then this success that others are having around the world would never have happened. It started here, and I suppose to that extent, it's quite an remarkable achievement.